Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. But let's talk about what we're doing today, because today we have another incredible guest. He's a UConn School of Law graduate and currently works as the Organizing and Network Director at the People's Parity Project. He's held past positions as a pre-law fellow at the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center and as a legal intern at the National Homelessness Law Center. Excited to have him on the podcast today, Mr. Steve Kennedy. Before getting into the episode today, a few minutes of ads now. For no ads in the middle, no ads at the end. To support this podcast, please be sure to check out all the sponsors below: Start LSAT, Rhetoric, and LisaBlaster.com. If these sponsors bring great interest to you, please check out the sponsor links below in the description. I love them, and I hope you love them as much as I do. And of course, be sure to check us out at lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. One word, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. Start LSAT, started by former guest Alden Spratt, 21-year-old superstar and now an official sponsor of the Lawyers in the Making podcast. Start LSAT was built on breaking down barriers, allowing anyone access to high-quality LSAT prep. After receiving a 180 perfect score on his LSAT, yes, 180, Alden began building Start LSAT. Start LSAT includes 51 video modules, 400 official LSAT questions, study tips and tricks, and the techniques that took Alden to achieve that 180 perfect score. All for the low price of $110. Yes, that's right, $110. And when using code LITM10, you can get 10% off the Start LSAT self-paced course. But there's more. By using the code LITM100 at checkout, you also get $100 off Alden's upcoming 10-week course for the January LSAT. This 10-week course includes one-on-one tutoring, live classes, the Start LSAT self-paced course with 50-plus modules, weekly classes, access to Law Hub Advantage, and a direct line to the superstar himself, Alden. Alden focuses on building the muscles of your LSAT skills, training them, and making you unstoppable. Check out Start LSAT in the podcast description below at startlsat.com, where you can find offers for the course and one-on-one tutoring. And be sure to use those promo codes LITM100 at checkout for $100 off the 10-week course and LITM10 for 10% off the Start LSAT self-paced course. That is at startlsat.com, one word, startlsat.com, in the description below. Now it's time to talk about one of the sponsors of this podcast, Rhetoric. Rhetoric is a legal tech company that leverages AI to help litigators tailor their arguments to be more persuasive by understanding judges' preferences and tendencies based on their actual filings. A recent study published in Harvard Business Review shows that mirroring a judge's language preferences can increase your odds of success in litigation by 20% or more, and that is exactly what Rhetoric does for you. Back on episode 25, I had the privilege of having Luke Yangling, a good friend of mine and a former guest of the podcast, and from there, Rhetoric thus became a sponsor of the podcast. But now, Rhetoric has some new products to offer. With their brand new product, Cicero, students can replicate the experience of responding to a judge's question in court or the demands of cold calls. This product helps develop and refine verbal communication skills through tailored feedback on the quality of the student's presentation, providing endless practice opportunities. Using Debrief, students can hone their persuasive legal writing using the same tools that major law firms across the United States leverage to perform better than opposing counsel. Students can learn to write with flair and command of writers at the top firms using Debrief's analytics and drafting tools. Not only can Rhetoric upgrade and enhance your writing skills, but can now also help law students excel in the classroom and the courtroom while alleviating the stress of cold calls and performance demands. If you're interested in a demo, let them know you heard it here first, here from Nate. And to support this podcast, check out Rhetoric in the description below at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com.
Law students, are you feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or short on time in law school? Maybe you just want someone to show you a step-by-step framework to master the topics you're learning in your classes. I know the pressure you're under, and I've got the perfect solution for you. My course, the Law School Operating System, is proven to help you conquer law school with confidence and ease.
Created by Lisa Blasser, a former guest on the podcast and founder of the Law School Success Institute, this course breaks down every subject into manageable main topics that you run through a comprehensive study system to thoroughly prepare you for class and final exams. No more feeling like you need to know everything all at once in the beginning.
But that's not all, Nate. The Law School Operating System also teaches you how to schedule your studying and time effectively. For every topic, you'll know which study step you're on and when you'll complete it every week of your semester. No more mad dash cram sessions, more time with your loved ones. And with my system, you'll walk into your exams knowing you've given 100% of yourself, that there's nothing more you could have done to succeed, and there's no better confidence than that.
Lisa breaks it down like this: one class, one list of main topics, and one system to master each topic. With recorded and live sessions for students available on her website and partnerships with law schools nationwide, the Law School Operating System is here to help you thrive from day one to the final exam. Ready to take control of your law school journey and operate at your full potential in law school? Visit www.lisablasser.com today and enroll in the Law School Operating System. Be sure to use code LSOSNATE10 at checkout for 10% off the recorded course. That is code LSOSNATE10 at checkout. People of the universe, your host for today and forever, Nate Crespo, and here is my conversation with Steve Kennedy. Mr. Steve Kennedy, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
No problem, Steve. Very excited to have you on today. Now, Steve, before we get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Steve Kennedy. As you said, I am the Organizing and Network Director at the People's Parity Project, and I'm out of Newtown, Connecticut. And yeah, I took a pretty roundabout journey to get here. So yeah, looking forward to kind of diving into it.
And exactly we are. Now, what's interesting, we got a great Connecticut connection here. This morning, I had Mr. Ryan McKean on my podcast, and he currently teaches at UConn Law School, where you attended. We'll get to that soon. But let's start off on your unique journey here. You were at Boston University and then eventually went to UMass Boston, but you got a degree in chemistry. Now, that's very interesting. You ended there in 2012. You were also an infantry team leader at the U.S. Army. So can you talk about why you decided to go with chemistry and also your time in the Army as well? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so before, I don't know, way before I went to law school, I had never considered it at all. I was always really like a science person, like all through, high school, that kind of thing. And eventually, I went to BU for a couple of years. I was majoring in chemistry then. And then actually like the order there is I went for a couple of years, I dropped out and joined the Army. And then when I came back, I went to UMass and finished that degree, and then went on into a PhD program, which I ultimately didn't finish that whole thing, but left that with a master's from NYU.
So going forward, you had some internships. You were an intern at Biogen IDEC, which I hope I said that right. But you were an intern there. You were an undergraduate researcher. Then you went on. You went to get your Master's of Science. You were there at NYU for 2 years for biophysical chemistry. I have no idea what that is, and I will never get into it. Unfortunately, I like space, but like that's as much. Once you get into put numbers in front of me, my eyes start glazing over, and I don't even know what's going on. It's just going right over my head. But as time went on, you were a formulation intern at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Very nice. And then you decided you were a grad research assistant at NYU from 2012 to 2018. And then finally, you were a scientist too, DMPK, which I don't know what that stands for. I would like to explain it, but you were at Boehringer Ingelheim. I feel like I did pretty good on that. But can you explain what was going on there? What were you doing throughout those years with your chemistry degree? Yeah, so basically explain that.
Yeah, so basically, a lot of the time that I spent still working in science was at NYU, where I was in this PhD program. And the way that usually works is that you take classes for a couple of years, but most of it is just doing research. And what I was working on there was we were working on like protein structures. So basically, like any disease, most of the functions of your body are controlled by proteins, like mostly. And a lot of times diseases, what causes them is some sort of malfunction with those proteins or something like that, where a lot of times the structure of those proteins is what causes that problem. So if we can identify the structure of the protein, it makes it easier to design a drug to treat a disease. So I spent almost 6 years doing that. And it's just a grind. It's like you're kind of like in the lab all the time. Like it was a lot, especially because like later on, when I first started having kids, we moved it back into Connecticut. I was commuting into New York, doing that whole thing, and then being in the lab all day. It was crazy. Um, but that was kind of where my that switch first kind of started. That took me to the law is that like what in the very little free time that I had, I got involved with the Veterans Legal Services Clinic at Yale Law. And because, as you mentioned, I was, in the Army for a while. I'm an Iraq veteran. And, I had kind of a tricky end to my time in the Army. I came back from Iraq, wasn't diagnosed at the time, but had PTSD, had depression. And ultimately, I ended up going AWOL for like a little over a week, something like that. It wasn't anything crazy, but like, I was gone for a bit. When I came back, they diagnosed me and they were like, well, we don't have the resources to treat you, so you're gonna have to leave, basically. Um, and because I had been AWOL, I got a less than honorable discharge. And what that means, as far as veterans benefits goes, is that it cuts you off of a lot of things. Unfortunately for me, just the specific characterization, I still was able to get like I could go to the VA hospital. I was able to get disability, things like that. But there are certain benefits I couldn't get, like the GI Bill, things like that, couldn't do. But other people who have different characterizations don't even get any of that. You can't even go to the VA. You can't do anything. So on the side, I started doing this kind of like organizing work within Connecticut. I was the Connecticut team leader for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and got involved with the clinic at Yale. And at first, we were just doing kind of like state level advocacy. So, we passed the first state level expansion of veterans benefits to veterans with less than honorable discharges if they had a diagnosis of PTSD, traumatic brain injury, or an experience of military sexual trauma. But then in the course of doing that work, I was just talking to the clinic about like my experience, and they're like, oh, we've been looking for somebody just like you because we want to bring a lawsuit against the Army. So I ended up being the named plaintiff in this class action lawsuit against the Army, where basically it was a lot of the claims were under like, the Administrative Procedures Act, like that kind of thing, where basically there were some regulations that the Army Discharge Review Board was not following. They're supposed to give consideration to mental health conditions and that kind of thing. And that was a directive straight from the Secretary of Defense. And the clinic had a bunch of data that showed that they basically weren't following that. So we brought this lawsuit saying you haven't been actually following your regulations in the reviews, and this is cutting off all of these veterans from the benefits that they need to actually be made whole. It's like you're talking about people who were discharged for mental health conditions, now being shut out of mental health treatment. It's just like it was a really just like horrific way they were handling this and just custom designed to um increased veteran suicide, things like that, where like it's just there are all kinds of downstream effects of this. And it took a few years, but ultimately, like we did settle that suit, and we got new reviews for tens of thousands of veterans, which was great. But in the meantime, I was working with the clinic, and I enjoyed the work I was doing in the lab. I always really liked the content. The day to day, it's like I was not the best scientist. I'm kind of like not meticulous enough for some of that, and it's really just like going in, doing the same kind of thing, making sure everything's just right. I was much more comfortable with like the analysis, the interpretation, that kind of thing. So I'm in this job that like again I was interested in, but not necessarily enjoying. And I started spending more and more of my time on the side doing this legal work, like both, following along with what's happening in the lawsuit, but and also doing this policy work. And at some point, it was like, shit, maybe this is what I need to be doing myself, you know? Uh, and that was when I left the PhD program and just, took my master's and took the job at Boehringer Ingelheim where I was doing, that was a little bit different. It was more of like the DMPK piece is just like you're basically looking at like how drugs are metabolized. So you can see how long they persist in the bloodstream, like that kind of thing. So it was really, if I didn't like if I wasn't so into the other research I was doing, this was very like very meticulous, kind of just like all these different time points, just pipetting things out over and over again. And like it was a decent job, but again, it was for me, it was a transition. I was like, this is something I can do to pay my bills until I can get into law school and switch over. So that was when yeah, I decided to apply to UConn Law. Um, and I had been kind of looking around, but by that point, like I had a family. I wasn't looking to move anywhere. I was just like, we're gonna go somewhere here. And really fortunately, um, in Connecticut, we have state level veterans education benefits where you can get a tuition waiver at any state school. So it's pretty awesome. It's like you can go to law school with no tuition. So went there and just kind of took it from there. So I went at night. So I was still working this chemistry job during the day, going to class at night, and eventually, like halfway through that, this was like right around the time that the pandemic hit. I was able to switch over and started doing legal jobs and left chemistry behind. And that was kind of like my last time that I was in the lab was at that job at BI.
So to backtrack a little bit, to go back to 2019, when you first started at UConn, you explained a lot there, but just to pinpoint down a little more, to reiterate a bit more again, what went into the decision? Why'd you go to law school? As I ask everyone on this podcast, why exactly did you go to law school? What was the spark to really be like, I'm doing this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was seeing what we were able to do for people who were being left behind by the system, people who were being marginalized. Because in addition to the stuff we did around discharges, we did a bunch of work around like racial discrimination in the military. We did some things around sexual orientation and gender identity, like a bunch of like a lot of the populations that you don't necessarily like identify with your kind of, old Vietnam veteran kind of like that, as like younger people, I mean, like, I don't know, I'm a lot older than you are probably, but younger, that kind of image that you have, the veterans community is pretty diverse, like among younger people, like the, post 9/11 veterans, things like that. So we worked with like a lot of people and just did some work that I was really proud of, like being able to just make their lives better. And that hadn't been something that I associated the law with. Like I didn't have like I'm a first generation law student, a first generation college student. Um, I didn't have a ton of people in my life where I was just kind of like, oh yeah, you can go and do like justice work as a lawyer, which like sounds maybe ridiculous now, but it's like I just associated that with like corporate law and whatever, and it was just like I wasn't interested. Um, so seeing the real life impact that we could have with people was really the biggest thing for me. And then I think also, more just practically, like I said, the work that I was doing was it's just oriented completely differently. And that was something that like I really a contrast that I really enjoyed. It's like going into the law, it's like there's not a right answer. I mean, it's like I'll think there's a right answer, fine. It's just like but it's not like working in chemistry where like there's just like there's a right answer here. There is an actual like whatever concentration of this chemical in this solution. Um and there's kind of no disputing that. You make your you as long as you set up your experiments right, you can find out what that number is. You get into the law, it's just you're just making your best arguments. You're trying to be as convincing as you can, and if you can do that, then yeah, maybe. I mean, this gets complicated and implicates my current work a little more now because it does depend on the actual environment you're operating in. But ideally, you make your best argument, and maybe you can win. Um, and that was something that was really appealing because, like I said, I was really enjoyed like I'd have my results and say like, oh, what does this mean for, like the research area that I'm in? Like, what does it mean for like how we can treat this disease, like that kind of thing. Like, all the kind of conjecture of like what we should do next. That was my favorite part. And that's like 5% of the job. I feel like in law, it's like basically 100% of the job. It's more like 95% job, something like that. It's like that's what you're working with, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's amazing because it's such a super interesting perspective. It's a very unique perspective. Obviously, I there's been a couple guests that were in the sciences before deciding to go into law school, but it was exactly that point. They were more into the analytics of it, the results of it, and then deciding, oh, what does this mean? What are the implications of it? What can we go from here? Whereas with the law, you're sort of setting those implications already. You're setting the analysts already, and you're creating your argument, and then creating, this is what's going to happen if so and so law or so and so motion happens in this trial or this law passes. So I love that. I love it very much. Now, we always love talking about the first year of law school, and your first year of law school was very unique because you were going to night school, you were doing it at the end of the day. So, how was the first year of law school for you?
My first year of law school was kind of wild. It was um my youngest kid was born during orientation. So I missed our orientation entirely. Uh and then had my parental leave for the first few weeks or whatever. So I started late. But I think like having, coming in like a little bit older, I had a good sense of like how I work, and like what I was looking for. So I was able to draw on that. Like that was helpful. But yeah, I got a late start, and then maybe like a month after I finally showed up, uh, I got rear-ended and got a really bad concussion. So I missed like another month practically. Like my whole first semester was a mess. Um, but despite all of that, I really, I did really enjoy it. Again, like just that contrast was just like it was exactly what I needed. It was interesting. It was really interesting work. It was just like a really different way of approaching problems and kind of like just thinking through things. And I really enjoyed just kind of like digging into that. So despite like all of the craziness, it was pretty enjoyable. But then of course that same year, COVID also hit in the spring. So it was like the whole first year was a lot. It was a lot, but I think despite that, I had great professors. I had a good class around me, and like we were able to kind of like work through all of that. But yeah, lots of it was kind of a roller coaster that first year.
So, going throughout the rest of law school, throughout the rest of your law school career, how did the background in chemistry, all the years of being a scientist, like how did that play? Did it, if it did play a role, how did it play a role throughout your law school experience, either like through just the work itself, studying, stuff like that?
I think that more so than like the specific work that I had done previously, just like having had like I said, having had some time to really kind of like figure out like what I want and how I work was really helpful. So like I at that point, I'd been in the army, I'd been working as a chemist, I'd been in school for, I don't know, forever. It felt like just kind of continuously between, my bachelor's and then the PhD program and then this. But it was that was the thing that I think was most helpful for me is just like some of that experience and being able to like really know again like know myself and what I was there for because it's the kind of thing where I was not so much like okay, law school was my next thing, and I just need to, get A's in every class and be in law review and do every single thing. It was actually just kind of, I mean, part of it helps that I was going for free. But I was able to just kind of enjoy myself to to the extent that you can. Like take classes that were interesting to me and things that I felt like I could draw on later, like going into like a more kind of like people focused kind of legal career, which is what I was going for. Being, I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like, but something more like public interest kind of work and that kind of thing. So I could just kind of, I felt a little more freedom to just kind of explore, which I think was really helpful. I think if I had gone straight into law school before all of that previous 10 or 15 years or whatever, I think I would have handled it really differently. And this is, some people, there are plenty of people who just go straight to law school and they're fine. I think for me, especially considering the fact, I don't know, I dropped out of college too. I don't think that it would have worked the same for me. So that was something I was really kind of grateful for is like just having that experience and just like kind of acknowledge it myself and to be able to really bring that to what I was doing.
So do you think that putting less pressure on yourself to, get the high grades, be the best in your class, sort of that kind of stuff, do you think it actually helped you get better grades and not exactly having so much pressure on yourself, having that pressure of like, I have to do the best I possibly can. I'm going to study 70 million hours a week, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I do. I think that like and by the end I was not doing as much and like it's at some point it did hurt me a little bit, but like not in a way, not in like a long-term sense. It was just like, yeah, my grades started going down, whatever. But again, it was kind of nice, like knowing why I was there. Like, I'm not looking to go clerk on the Supreme Court or something like that. Like, if I don't have a 4.0, no one's gonna care. It's fine. So I was, and this was something that like, later on, like in my current job, we just, for a project I did once, I interviewed a bunch of public interest employers and just to see what they're looking for. Like, are you looking for some of these same things that you read in your kind of like general law school advice kind of books, blogs, whatever it is you're getting your advice from? And the answer was like pretty resoundingly no. It was very like really like what these people were looking for. And like I didn't know this for a fact at the time, but this is just was my approach was that they were looking for someone who's like people who are dedicated to this work. And it's the kind of thing where like what I prioritized was going out and getting experience like in the fields that I wanted to work in. Um, doing, not just doing the kind of um, student org thing, like, okay, go to an event, do a lunch talk, and then you know, wrap it up and that's it. I was seeking out some of the organizations where you're like you're really kind of getting your hands dirty, and like doing like legal assistance work, doing kind of like policy work, like that kind of thing, where you can really start doing things right off the bat, just by being a law student. So for me, I was kind of like, I'll take a B in that class if it means I have the time to go and work at the legal aid office or whatever, like that was kind of my approach.
Yeah, I think that's an important approach to take because you're valuing what you want to do later. You're valuing the things that you would want to do beyond law school, and maybe a lower grade or two might hurt you in the short term for your brain at least or your mind. You're like, oh my God, I gotta be, I'm gonna die. It's the end of the world. But like you said, it's not the end of the world. You were focused solely on what you wanted to do later. But in finding out what you wanted to do later, what we always love talking about on this podcast, and finding out what you do want to do, finding out what you don't want to do. And of course, you had some experience before working with the Army, working with the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans for America. So you had some experience there. You had a sneak peek into what exactly it would look like. But you did have some clerkships and internships at law school. You were a law clerk at the Flood Law Firm. You were a legal intern at the National Homelessness Law Center. I'm tripping over my words. And you were also in the Greater Hartford Legal Aid. And then finally, you were a pre-law fellow at the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. Now, through those experiences, did you figure out what you wanted to do? And then can you also, talk about those experiences a little bit as well?
Yeah, yeah. So one thing that I don't even, I mean, this is like not even on my resume, but like I did briefly do some work in patent law, which makes sense. It's like I'm coming from, I've got like, advanced degree in chemistry and whatever. And I was just like, oh, you've got to go into patents, right? You got to do IP, which, I know people have gone into this and they love it. For me, I couldn't stand it. It was very, it was closer to being a scientist still almost, or just like I'm going through, you're defining all these things in such minute detail, just like it was just kind of too dry for me. Like I said, a lot of people just like really love that, but for me it didn't work. But that was um kind of the one of the easier positions for me to get, just given my background. But it wasn't what I wanted, so I ultimately ended up leaving that and went into some of these other positions. And it was a nice mix of different things, because like working at the flood law firm was like that was like a personal injury kind of thing, or like drafting complaints, doing like a little bit of like motion practice kind of stuff. um and it was a good introduction just to kind of like the nuts and bolts of trial level litigation, which was nice. And I was working with cool people, and it was nice too, just because it was another field that, as an outsider, like the only kind of image I had of it was like the highway billboards and like whatever the way it's portrayed kind of in popular culture, which can be kind of like sleazy and weird. But what I found, and you just talked to Ryan McKean, so he knows this, um, these people are amazing. And I think that it's like I worked with some really great people, and the purpose of the work is actually serving people, people who've been harmed by their employer, people who've been harmed, like, they're getting screwed by an insurance company or something like that. They need somebody to like make sure that they're getting what they need. And I really enjoyed that. And it was just a new idea for me, where that was just an area of law that like I hadn't really considered, and I actually really enjoyed it. Um, the rest of the work that I did was more in kind of like the nonprofit space, where, between um, when I was at the National Homelessness Law Center, that was they do a lot of different work. They do a lot of litigation and policy organizing, that kind of thing. My work there was mostly policy focused, but it was a great experience, just seeing, again, so many of the different ways that you can use the law to try and serve people. So, the work that I was doing, we were basically pushing for like state level acknowledgement of a right to housing, trying to get that codified in legislation. Um, but then, there were other people at the organization who were, they're suing over, sweeps and things like that, where people's property is being destroyed, like that kind of thing. There are like all these different ways that, the organization is working to help people who are unhoused, and just like address homelessness generally, which is a really cool experience. And then I also, when I was at Greater Hartford Legal Aid, that was more of your typical kind of legal aid. And I started that job. Um, that fellowship was actually, the interview for that was the first thing I ever did on Zoom right at the beginning of the pandemic. Um, and ended up changing a lot because of that. This program that I was going into, usually the way it would run, is that you would go to like one of the local kind of like free clinics and do screening kind of stuff. So someone's coming in with like a health problem, and then you've got a desk right there, like, oh, maybe they're also facing eviction or something like that. And because they're already here, you can say like, oh, well, we've got people at GHLA who can help with that, like that kind of thing. So it was like really more like straightforward, just kind of doing screening kind of work. But because everything shut down, couldn't do that anymore, right? So, but for me, it ended up being a really great experience. It was something where I got to then go work with the housing unit, because there was so much going on. Like, obviously, once everything shut down, we're all worried about like, what's going to happen with housing, how many people are going to be evicted, what's going to happen once people are evicted, and now you're congregating in shelters, like that kind of thing. Um, And then in response to that, there were all these new assistance programs and new laws to go with them. And like, no one's ever worked with any of this stuff before. So it was really cool to be able to be a part of that process and like, be just as a law student, be able to go through and kind of do the first memo on like what um, the governor's executive authority looks like under an emergency declaration, like because it's not something that like at your legal aid you have to really deal with all that often, and obviously like the actual attorneys went through that and they made their own stuff out of it, but like getting the first crack at it was pretty cool. So that was a really nice experience. And then I think the last position I had while I was still in law school before the one that I'm in now, because I actually did transition before I graduated, but um, that last position was at the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center, which was like really kind of wide ranging. It was interesting work. I mean, this was an organization that I'd worked with before, like in my, not on staff, but when I was doing that veterans organizing work, CVLC was, they were somebody that we would go to because it's a pretty unique organization. There are only a couple in the country that do this kind of like it's almost like just like legal aid work, but it's for veterans. So some of it is you're just like, the same kind of thing. It's like housing, like that kind of thing, maybe government benefits, that kind of stuff. But then on top of it, you have all of this other layer of like veterans discharge upgrades, appealing disability decisions, like all of those things that are really specific to veterans. And then even within like the housing space there, it's like there are different programs that veterans are eligible for. So you're going to approach some of those issues a little bit differently. So that was a really interesting experience. And it was the first, I actually still use like my writing sample, whatever, is still from there because I had the chance to write a brief for the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims when I was there, appealing a disability effective date decision, which was that was really cool. That was a really fun experience, getting to do some like appellate level writing and do some work and research. That kind of thing was really cool. And then through all of that, one of the things that I did kind of early on in law school is I connected with the People's Parity Project. And this was like a total coincidence practically, but like I said, I had come to law school looking to do, well, I was coming to law school with this kind of like policy and legislative experience. I was looking for a place to kind of apply that and kind of get some more experience there. And there weren't a lot of places to do it. But one of the students who worked with me from the Yale Clinic was an early board member of PPP, and I was like, "Hey, what was that organization you were working with? Like, I don't know, is that something that would make sense?" Like, and she was like, "Oh, yeah." She introduced me to the founders who were still running things at the time, and we started our chapter at UConn Law, and that was a great experience because what I really loved about PPP is like it's very action oriented. Like I said, it's not kind of like do your lunch talk and go home. It's like fine, still do a lunch talk, but it's like, all right, now what comes next? We're going to actually start organizing around this. We're going to, go to the state house and try and get something passed, whatever it is. So while I was in school, I had the chance to do some legislative work through PPP. So we did some work on gig workers' rights. So we were trying to get gig workers recognized as employees. I will make it easier for them to be recognized as employees in Connecticut, which is still ongoing work, but it was a great experience. And we did some other things as well, some other legislative work, and also just some like rapid response stuff during COVID. It's like we did actually before I was working for CVLC, we partnered with them to do reentry assistance for veterans who are coming out of prison. Because we were hoping, if we put this in place, this would make this easier to happen. We were hoping that more people would start to get released, especially because in Connecticut there is like a specific veterans program in one of our prisons where it's for people who are basically on their way out. And we're just like, you know what, just let them all out and we'll help them. And that didn't happen, but we did get to do some work helping some people out, and we got some good training for law students as well. But we did a bunch of things like that too, just like what's going on just with the pandemic, where are we needed, like how can we get law students plugged into some of this stuff so that we can help the organizations in the state, which was a really cool experience. And then that ultimately grew into my current role, where like I was still, I had like, I think I was in my last semester of law school, and this position went up. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I've loved working, volunteering with this organization the last 2 years, and I've got some decent experience here. Let's see what happens. And sure enough, here I am.
So first I have to say, I loved all the experiences. I love the fact that it was so hands-on and that you have to, that's what you were really looking for, what you were really anticipating to do is to have that action-oriented sort of internships and fellowships and clerkships and be able to do the work, get that experience, like you said, and now be able to work in your current job as the organizing and network director at the People's Parity Project. Now, what is PPP and what do you do as the organizing and network director?
Yeah, so the basic idea, like some of the work we do is kind of like broad ranging in some ways, but the basic idea is that the legal system as it exists is skewed towards corporate power and skewed towards state power, which leaves actual people behind, right? We want to take that same system and shift it towards in a more like pro people direction, as opposed to some of these like powerful entities. Um, and there are a number of ways that we do that, but all of it is rooted in a belief in organizing as kind of like a means of change. So one of the big things that we try and keep in mind ourselves and kind of impress on some of the students and lawyers that we work with is just like there are enough structural problems here that like you can't just like litigate your way out of them. The law as it exists needs to change, and that is something that for us is just something we believe as a matter of policy, principle, whatever you want to call it. But also it's if you're working for people, like whatever position you're in, it's also a way of serving your clients, right? If you are representing somebody where the law is just completely like not on your side, like you need to have those skills. If you're actually going to win for this person, you might need to actually try and change the law. And that's something that, we've actually done some work when I was still in school. We did some work with like an employment firm, like a plaintiff side employment firm, where they were just like, the law here is just terrible for us, you know? And even just as a matter of policy, you can see why it's a problem. Like, so it's not just like this self-serving kind of thing because now we can bring more lawsuits, but just like it's actually hurting the people that they work with. So law school does a really great job of getting you to work within the law as it exists. But what do you do when that is, it's just completely not going to work for the people that you are working with? What are you going to do when the law needs to change? So a lot of what I do in my role as our organizing and network director is doing, training law students and lawyers in being able to do that kind of work. And also doing kind of community building and that kind of thing where we're trying to change the culture as well. So on law school campuses, that's something that is really difficult. Like public interest drift is, what it's usually called, where like, 90% of people come in saying, I want to do public interest, and then 90% of people leave not doing public interest, it's like it totally is flipped by the time everyone graduates. And part of that, we believe is just the way that the law school is structured and what the priorities of the schools are. Like so much of this, you're really kind of funneled towards more of these corporate type jobs and things like that. And it can be difficult to kind of stick with what you want, especially when, you consider like the amount of debt you're taking on, like all these things, like there are just so many things working against people actually staying on that path. So a big part of it is also just providing a community, like a supportive community for people who want to kind of go down that path and just creating spaces where like that is the norm, as opposed to, okay, again, like you have that kind of path where it's like, I'm coming to law school, I'm getting all A's, I'm doing law review, I'm doing moot court, I'm getting a clerkship, I'm going into big law, you know? Um, what are some of the other like how do we support the people going in different directions? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And of course, it's the tagline of this podcast. There is no straight path, only your unique journey. And even within law school, it may seem like there is that straight path where, you get your clerkship, you go to big law, so on and so forth. But I think it's so important that you're doing work such as this, that you're presenting people that no, you don't have to go down that straight path, that there are unique ways you could go around if you have a great interest in public interest, a double entendre there. But if you do have that interest in public interest, there are ways that you can work in that sort of industry, that you could work in that sort of space. And clearly at PPP, you're offering people that sort of opportunity. So I think that's amazing because, of course, I mean, it goes towards my hypothesis, just further proving that there's so many unique ways that you could go about being in a legal space, being in the legal industry, and public interest is a huge part of it. Of course, it plays a huge role in just politics in general, public policy, getting laws passed, getting, I'm blanking and listen, I'm not a political science guy, but I'm sure you can explain it very well. I'll let you explain it, Steve. What are some of the implications of being a part of the public interest sort of law space? What can you do with that sort of thing?
I mean, I think that there are a lot of different ways you can go there. And one of the things that we try and do at PPP as well is like think of that really broadly. So a lot of times, public interest, that's the term that people know. So like, yeah, we end up using that. But a lot of times what we'll also use to describe some of the careers that we're supporting and some of like these like aspirations that like a lot of our organizers have is like pro people careers. So um, you have your traditional public interest, public defense, legal aid, civil rights, some of that kind of stuff. But then also what we'll include is, just plaintiff side litigation, so your kind of plaintiff side employment lawyers, your labor lawyers, your environmental lawyers, some of these other people who don't always get grouped into that same like public interest space. But I think for us, the priority and the focus is just that you are serving people and not powerful interests. So that can look so many different ways. There's like I said, you can be doing your more kind of like direct services kind of stuff, doing harm reduction. You can be doing policy change. You can be doing impact litigation. That just can look so many different ways. And obviously, like there are different pros and cons depending on where your interests are. But for us, I shouldn't say for us, for me at least, it's like that's kind of like the North Star is like who are we serving here? Is it somebody already, is it like an entity already in power that is already kind of skewing the law in its favor, or is it the people who are being harmed? Um, and like I said, there are so many different ways you can do that, and some of them are often overlooked. So like you have that traditional law school path towards like corporate law. You have the stuff that's more well known, like your kind of traditional public interest, but you don't hear that much about like plaintiff side law, for example, where like, yeah, okay, maybe I'm worried about my debt load, and I'm especially depending on where you live, like I don't know that like public defense is going to work for me right now. You can still go to a private defense firm. You can go to like a plaintiff side civil firm, like things like that, where like you can fine, you're making a little more money or whatever, where like it's making it easier to manage that. But like I said, you're working for actual people and like advancing people's interests, which is really kind of what we're about.
Yeah, something I always talk about on the podcast is sort of the human aspect of the law. Like you were saying before you go throughout law school, you kind of just think about the law and you're just reading about the law and that's all you really know, but you're not able to think beyond it. You read the word. No, I've never been to law school, but you read the cases, you read the briefs, you write your outlines and it's just words on a page and it's a bunch of terms and you're trying to memorize it all, but there are real people behind those cases. There are real entities behind those cases, and even something like personal injury, which sometimes I guess in the movies kind of gave it the bad rap, but I know I think it's called The Civil Suit. I watched it in like high school. John Travolta's in it, but it was one of those things where he was like the ambulance chaser, and then he got a bunch of treatment for these people in Massachusetts. I don't know, I can't remember it. I'm not even gonna explain it, but it sort of showed off that point that like even personal injury people are helping people, like people in car accidents, people who got accidents at work, whatever it may be. It is a people, it's a people industry, and sometimes from the outside. it doesn't look that way. It doesn't look like you're just reading words, you're translating stuff, giving it to judges, they're looking over stuff. But it's such a people industry. And I guess I could ask you, you seem like the perfect person to ask, but can you talk about the human aspect of the law? How much that it has to do with it? Really, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that's kind of one of my um, issues just with the way that most, law schools approach some of this instruction. Is like, again, like you need to know how to like work your way through an opinion and like write a brief and whatever. But one thing that's almost never addressed is the context of how these cases come down. So like you said, like behind all of those, your case caption, like XVY, um, are real people who have real stakes in what's happening here. And like that's something that like, like I said, I speak of like from experience. Like that was me. It was Kennedy v. McCarthy. So like, um, and for me, in that case, ultimately, like that ended up, it was just like a representative basically because they upgraded me before it even resolved. But um, that's something where there are people in that case that who we were representing that they're completely shut off. Like they had severe PTSD that led to some whatever drug use or something like that that got them kicked out. And now they have nothing. They have no way of recovering from that. And some of the people that we talked to, it's like it ruined their lives. It's really it's horrific. Um, and that's not something you're gonna read in um our settlement agreement or whatever, or just like if it came down to an opinion or something, you're not gonna see that in like the opinion that came down um when we beat their motion to dismiss or whatever it is. It's like you're not going to read this in the legal documents, but like when you actually sit down with some of these people who are struggling, like really struggling with this, it's like you can see what the stakes are. Like it's not this like analytical thing or whatever. It's very real. And that's something that one thing that we've done at PPP is we've shifted a lot of focus towards the state level as well, because that's where most of this is happening. It's like 95% of cases are happening at the state level. And again, behind all of those cases, um, it's impacting somebody. I mean, fine. Sometimes you have like a corporate versus corporate case, but like actually not even sometimes, often. But in a case where you have an actual person, like they're there for a reason. Like it takes a lot to say, yes, I'm going to go be the face of a lawsuit. Like they're not doing that for no reason. It's because there are real stakes for them. And that's just something you really don't learn. And beyond that, this is like moving past the kind of like people thing, I guess. But one thing I think that we also really don't get a lot of and we don't think about as much is just like what actually goes into making some of these big cases happen. So you'll learn about Brown v. Board of Education, where we're integrating schools, things like that. But like in law school, you're not going to learn about all the organizing work that happened for decades beforehand that made that possible. Like it wasn't, I mean, yes, there was a great litigation strategy that kind of like, built up towards that. But without all of the work that was happening on the ground, like even you could have the best strategy, the best arguments, it still wouldn't have worked. It's the kind of thing where you need the judges to be ready to meet you there too. And that comes through like society-wide kind of work, which again is a lot of what we're kind of trying to get people to think more about.
No, I think it's all excellent and I love it so much. But Steve, we're now down to our last five questions. The first of the five questions. So I see throughout my entire journey doing this podcast, but the law is moving in a certain way. There's so many new technologies, AI software, whatever they may be. So Steve, this is the tech stack question per se, either personally that you use or for your work that you do at PPP. What sort of tech recommendations do you have for people out there?
Mm, that's a good question. I think one of the things that I learned, like tech kind of things that I learned on this job that was really useful, and this is not going to apply to everybody, but especially if you're doing kind of policy facing work, um, learning how to scrape internet pages and like to scrape dockets, like that kind of thing, is really helpful. So, I mean, there are all different ways you can do this. I mean, I'm trying to remember. Like I used a program called Octoparse. There's all different things you can use to do this,
Yeah.
but that was a really important tech skill that I did not have that I picked up and has been now I use it all the time. It's great.
I mean, that's it. Listen, new recommendation. Even if it was just one, it is a new recommendation. No one's talking about scraping dockets. I know a little bit about it, fortunately, a little bit, very small. But we move to our fourth to last question. Steve, Live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast. What are your book recommendations for people? It doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books you've ever read, something you give a gift to someone.
Mm, okay. Right now, this is like right now I'm really enjoying I'm reading a book called Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's more of an organizing focused book, but it's just a really different perspective. And it's a whole series actually. I first got into it through another book that was like part of the series, but now kind of like worked back to the first one. But it's a lot of it is about how there are all these little ways, like all these little things you can do that then can have big, broad impacts. So like one of the things that, you know, when I'm that I've kind of gotten from that's been helpful is like I when I'm kind of like struggling and feeling like, wow, like is what I'm doing having any impact at all? Like just kind of feeling down. One of the things that I really appreciated from that book is this idea of like no matter what you're doing, no matter how small it is, it's almost like you're like you can be this little tributary of like a bigger stream, you know, or a bigger river or whatever. And like there are enough of you now. Now you're the size of the Mississippi or whatever. I don't have the perspective to be able to see that when I'm just like typing up an email trying to like bring our people together or something like that. It's like is this doing anything? But if you kind of trust that there are enough of you out there that are doing this, it can really make a difference. And also just like little things, like even just the way that you individually approach the world, you do it in the way that you want to, that can have an impact on larger formations too. So like that's been cool. On top of that, I don't know. I've been reading a lot of sci-fi lately. I just finished like the Three Body Problem series. That was fun. But yeah.
Well, those are both great recommendations. Another new recommendations on the podcast. I always enjoy them. I love new books. I eat them. So very happy to hear that. I will be sure to check out Emergent Strategies. But third to last question here, Steve. What are the sorts of things you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis? Either that be through social media, so Instagram, LinkedIn, people still use Facebook apparently. I keep saying that in every episode. But Reddit, YouTube, any Substacks you subscribe to, any newsletters, any podcasts that you listen to. What is crossing the transom of Steve's mind on a daily basis?
Okay. I mean, as far as news, really just Twitter still. It's kind of where I'm getting my stuff at. It's like and yeah, we'll see if that remains the case, but for now, still there. Um, and then yeah, I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I mean, especially like as far as like legal stuff goes, 5 to 4 is great. Listen to a lot of that, but also just I try and listen to things a little more broadly too. So like Code Switch and NPR is really good. Just getting different, it's like little vignettes of just like different things that are going on, like having to do with like like race and culture and that kind of thing, which is really I like a lot. I've learned a lot from that. There's another one that I'm not thinking of that's really going to bother me. See on Radio is great. They just finished their capitalism series, which I really enjoyed. But yeah, so it's kind of where I'm getting my information mostly.
Well, that's fantastic. New stuff again. New podcast. Never heard of 5 to 4, never heard of Code Switch. So now I have new stuff to listen to. I love podcasts as well. But fourth to last question here, Steve. You're at PPP, you're working, you're organizing, but what does an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Steve?
Ooh. So actually, I'll tell you because I'm about to do it. Taking a while. I have 4 kids, so like most of the time I'm doing stuff here. But they're sleeping over at my parents' house this weekend, so my wife and I are gonna head out into New Haven, go grab a couple drinks, go for dinner, and that's really like that's all I need. At this point, like I don't have like tons of things I'm doing. It's like I really enjoy. It's like yeah, that's kind of like nice night out. Otherwise, it's like, I don't know, I'm out in the garden, I'm doing something outside.
But the Sunday morning, what does the Sunday morning look like?
Oh, that's probably the garden. Actually, honestly, it's probably laundry, but like, yeah, if ideally, that's like the garden time.
Wow. I mean, 4 kids. First of all, congratulations on that. I'm late on the congratulations, but that's absolutely amazing. Are they all younger?
Yeah, so they're 10, 8, 7, and 5.
Oh my goodness, Steve, you got your hands full over there, man. Oh my goodness. Well, I hope to have a nice family like that too. So congratulations on that, of course. Now, final question here, Steve. I do this at the end of every single episode with every single guest. But what are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the legal professionals out there in the world?
I think what's been most important for me, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think what's been most important for me is really just like knowing myself and what I'm here for. That's something that I did not always have in my life, obviously. But I think just being kind of patient with myself and not being afraid to like change directions, or, is this the right thing to do or what? It's just kind of like, what, like this is what feels right. And I'm gonna go ahead and pursue that until it doesn't feel right anymore. There isn't a right way to do law school. There isn't a right way to do a legal career. I think that everybody kind of finds their own way, and like the more you can trust that that is okay, the better off you are.
Well, Steve, beautifully said, quite poetic. You won't know till you do it, and you won't find out till you really do it. So, Steve, thanks so much for coming on here, spreading your wisdom, spreading your experiences. And of course, for everyone out there listening, check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com, lawyers in the making, one word, substack.com. And I will see you all in the next one.